Just forget her. A piece of advice that sounds reasonable, perhaps even necessary, when we're hurting. But what if it isn't that simple? What if that cold silence isn't an ending, but a test, a calculated game of the mind? Not because she's over you, but because she's watching, waiting to see how you'll respond. Will you collapse? Will you cling? Will you continue to play by the rules she silently imposed? Today, everything changes. No more chasing after emotions. No more craving an explanation or one last chance. We flip the board, not with words, not with anger, but with the supreme weapon of self-discipline, deliberate silence. Because in Stoicism, mastering one's emotions is not weakness. It is the pinnacle of inner power. And sometimes, the strongest counterattack is no reaction at all. 1. Do not react. Observe. When hurt by a woman he cares about, a man's first instinct is often to react. He texts to ask why, calls to plead, even tries to fix things he himself doesn't fully understand. These actions stem from confusion, a desire for clarity, and a sense of losing control. But if one observes closely, each reaction carries an unspoken message. I need you to know who I am. This is why in Stoic philosophy, reaction is not strength, it is dependence. When someone can shift your emotional state with mere indifference, when their words or actions rob you of reason, you have surrendered a dangerous power, the power over your inner peace. And every reaction only deepens that surrender. The more you chase attention, the more you declare they hold the upper hand. The truth is, not everyone who hurts you intends to manipulate, but your overreaction grants them that power all the same. When she realizes that one message can ruin your sleep, or that silence alone can unravel you, no further action is needed. The control is already hers. In Stoicism, reclaiming power does not begin with controlling others, but with refusing to react to what lies outside your control. And the first thing beyond your control is the emotions, thoughts, and actions of another. You cannot force someone to care, to love, or to treat you fairly, but you can choose not to let it disturb your mind. Silence, when born of understanding, is no longer avoidance. It becomes an act of will. You withdraw your attention, your need for validation, the power you once gave away so easily. In that silence, you not only regain your balance, you send a clear message. I do not need others to define my worth. It is in the moment you stop reacting that the other is left to face the void your silence creates. And that void not only invites reflection on their actions, it makes plain that you are no longer under their sway. This assertiveness requires no explanation, no debate, no announcement. It is clearest when you remain still, grounded, calm, unhurried. To remain silent while your instincts urge you to act is an inner triumph. You have nothing to prove. You are merely reclaiming the sovereignty you once gave away, unknowingly. And in all Stoic thought, that is always the beginning of true restoration. When wounded by the coldness or silence of someone once close, the emotional response is almost immediate. The mind descends into chaos. Feelings of abandonment, doubt, disappointment, and anger surge all at once, leaving many disoriented. In those moments, the survival instinct compels rash action, sending explanations, seeking reassurance, or simply clinging to connection in order to fill the void. However, in Stoic philosophy, the first step is not to react, but to pause and observe one's inner state. Not to deny emotion, but to recognize and understand each movement occurring within the mind. The Stoic does not battle emotions, nor do they flee from them. Instead, they practice the ability to name emotions accurately, allowing them to exist within the space of awareness without dictating behavior. The process of inner observation begins by admitting, I feel hurt, I crave recognition, or I fear being forgotten. This may seem simple, but in truth, it demands great courage and mindfulness. Most people have a tendency to reject or suppress negative emotions rather than accept their presence. This denial often leads to impulsive actions, for emotions that are not properly acknowledged will find another outlet, often through risky behavior lacking control. Meanwhile, observing emotion with objectivity creates a gap between me and my emotion. This distance is the foundation that allows the Stoic to remain composed amid adversity. They do not equate themselves with anger, do not see sorrow as identity, and do not let fear become a compass for their actions. They simply acknowledge, anger is arriving, I see it, rather than letting it lead the way. This ability helps one avoid the trap of fleeting emotions. The feelings that erupt after emotional injury are often intense, yet short-lived. If left unchecked, they can easily drive one toward decisions later regretted. In contrast, if you can sit still with the emotion, face it as an observer rather than a subject, it will gradually lose its grip. Inner observation is not indifference. It is a deliberate act of reason, maintaining one's ground amid turmoil. It is the first step toward restoration, where one begins to withdraw from external influences and return to the seat of inner command. After a relationship begins to fracture, or when a woman suddenly becomes cold and distant, the most common response is for a man to fall into speculation, confusion, and a pattern of reacting to every small gesture from her. A vague message, a social media like, or a suggestive photo. Any of these can disorient him and trigger questions like, does she still care? Is she trying to come back? Should I reply? Yet Stoicism points toward a completely different path. Instead of reacting, observe. Observing another's behavior goes beyond noting surface actions. More important is understanding the underlying motive. A person may act in many ways, but not every action means what it appears to. In emotionally charged situations, behavior is often strategic or designed to test, rather than to express sincere emotion. For instance, if she sends a brief message after a long silence, it might be a sign of care, but it might also be a test, probing whether you are still emotionally affected. If she posts a photo with another man, it might not signal a new relationship, but simply aim to provoke, to draw a reaction. If you rush to respond, express feelings, or seek clarity, you've placed yourself in a passive role where your emotions are controlled by the actions of another. Observation requires you to maintain a certain emotional distance. This does not mean becoming indifferent, but rather preserving your right to respond with reason. You learn to interpret signals objectively, avoiding decisions driven by fleeting emotions. From the Stoic perspective, the actions of others are beyond your control, but your perception and response to those actions remain entirely within your domain of mastery. Observation also allows you to recognize recurring patterns in the other person's behavior. If you notice that vague gestures often follow your silence, it is likely not genuine remorse but impatience at losing control over you. If attention only resurfaces when you withdraw, it is probably not affection, but fear of lost power. Understanding this helps you avoid the trap of mixed signals. You are no longer swayed by fleeting displays of affection or contradiction. Instead, you remain the observer, clear-minded amid all motion, and act only when necessary, not to win someone back, but to remain true to yourself. 2. Silence reverses the balance of power. In a relationship, a man's constant reactions often unknowingly create an emotional safety net for the woman. She knows that no matter how she behaves, No matter how distant she becomes, someone will always be there, explaining, caring, trying to reconnect, and holding on. That sense of always being persisted can slowly form a subconscious belief that she never has to face the consequences of withdrawal or silence, because he will always fill the void. However, when the man chooses intentional silence, when he no longer fulfills emotional expectations as before, the entire familiar structure begins to tremble. The space he leaves behind is no longer a stage she can command, but a mirror reflecting her own inner world, filled with unanswered questions. Why is he silent? Did I go too far? Do I still have a place in his life? Sustained silence does more than create discomfort. It disrupts an emotional reflex she has grown accustomed to. When her expectations go unmet, she loses orientation. Her mind shifts from a position of control to one of doubt. It forces her to confront herself, her choices, her actions, and the motives behind her decisions in the relationship. There are no more words to shield her from the emptiness, no more pleading to affirm her ego, no more reactions to validate her control. In the absence of all these things, she is left with only one presence, herself. And for many, this is the first time they must face a truth they have long ignored: that emotions cannot be manipulated indefinitely, that the other person does not exist to provide safety, and that distance always comes with a cost. That silence, created by the man who no longer reacts, becomes the space in which she begins to re-examine everything. She recalls the unanswered messages. She remembers the time she felt loved. She remembers the moment she realized that this time he might actually be gone, and that unease, no longer hidden behind the belief that he'll always be there, is what leads her to introspect, to reflect, and perhaps even to feel regret. Silence, in this case, is not punishment. It is the natural result of self-mastery. And when a man stops reacting, not out of manipulation, but because he has chosen to return to inner peace, the emotional energy in the relationship is redistributed. She, once in control, is now the only one left to answer the question, have I truly lost him? In many relationships, especially where emotional imbalance exists, the woman often assumes the man's presence is guaranteed. This is not always born of disregard, but often arises from a repeated pattern. Every time she withdraws, he steps closer. Every time she goes silent, he seeks reconnection. Gradually, this creates an implicit belief: no matter what happens, he will always return. That belief creates a sense of certainty, a one-sided psychological safety in which one party controls the rhythm of the relationship. When the man becomes predictable, reacting in patterns, his value is no longer seen through his character, but through his responses. This makes his presence lose its uniqueness, becoming an expectation, and everything expected eventually loses its appeal. However, when he begins to change his response, especially by choosing intentional silence, no longer chasing, no longer explaining, the entire balance is disrupted. She begins to feel something previously unknown: uncertainty. No more teely messages, no more presence aligned with expectation, no more familiar responses. And that absence is no longer seen as sulking or strategy, but as a clear signal that what once felt secure is slipping away. This uncertainty becomes the catalyst that shifts emotional positions in the relationship. From being in control, she moves into observation. From a place of dominance, she starts to feel unsettled. She may not show it outwardly, but inside, the confidence she once had begins to waver. She asks herself, will he come back this time like before? Has he truly let go? Who am I now in his life? Within prolonged silence, something new begins to take shape. the feeling of unpredictability, and it is this very feeling that forces her to reassess the value she once believed was unquestionably hers. The sense of certainty vanishes, replaced by unease. Unable to control his reaction, she is compelled to examine her own actions, something she never had to do before. The loss of that feeling of certainty not only shifts the emotional dynamic, but marks the first step in realizing what was once taken for granted existed only because the other chose to stay. In a relationship, the roles of pursuer and pursued are not fixed, but are often reinforced by repeated patterns of behavior over time. When one party consistently expresses a need for connection, affirms affection, and maintains presence, they gradually become the dependent one by default. Conversely, the one who keeps distance, offers fewer responses, and appears indifferent gradually becomes the focal point. The one who is chosen. When a man is hurt and continues to react out of habit, trying to explain, prove his worth, or reclaim affection, he remains in the role of the one being led, and in the woman's eyes, that image becomes increasingly predictable, even losing the appeal it once had. Attraction doesn't stem solely from appearance or words, but largely from self-possession and elusiveness. What is easily accessed, easily reacts, creates little mystery, and even less pull. However, when the man chooses silence, not out of resentment, but with calm and steadiness, the dynamic begins to shift. That silence, if maintained with firmness, gives rise to a distinct psychological state within the woman, a doubt about her own standing. She begins to ask, does he truly not need me anymore? Have I lost his attention for good? In that state of uncertainty, attraction begins to return, but in a completely new form. The man is no longer the desperate pursuer, but the one now deciding whether to continue investing in the relationship at all. He does not act to win her back, but watches to determine whether she is still worthy of his presence. This position is not created through threats, anger, or emotional manipulation, but through conscious withdrawal. When he chooses to focus on himself, to pursue personal growth, and to stop reacting to ambiguous signals, he becomes unpredictable, and with that, he reignites a curiosity that had once faded. At this point, attraction no longer stems from emotional intensity, but from character and conviction. The woman is now faced with the reality that the man who once pursued her is now deciding whether she is still worthy of being approached. And that shift completely alters the dynamics of the relationship. Well-timed silence does not make you disappear. It makes you worth rediscovering. You are no longer hoping to be chosen. You are the one choosing again. 3. When she tests your reaction, hold your ground. After a period of chosen silence, of stepping back from the emotional game and focusing on inner stability, the woman who once held a central place in your life may begin to make subtle moves that draw your attention. A brief message like, "Hey," or "How have you been?" A sudden like on an old post, a cryptic story update, or even a new photo with another man. These may seem harmless on the surface, yet from the perspective of Stoic philosophy and behavioral psychology, such actions are rarely as simple as they appear. In most cases, they are not genuine attempts at reconnection, but emotional tests. The aim is not to restart the relationship or resolve past issues, but to check, are you still reacting? Are you still affected by her? Are you still predictable, accessible, like before? And more importantly, does she still hold emotional power over you? An emotional test is a way of probing your reflex. It happens when she's no longer certain of her role in your life, having grown used to you being the first to respond, always present when she signaled. She acts when your silence extends beyond expectation to reestablish her peace, but rather than doing so through direct words, or clear actions. She sends ambiguous cues, enough for you to notice, but not enough for her to commit or take responsibility. If you react immediately, responding to the message, liking back, initiating conversation, or attempting to reconnect, you've unintentionally confirmed what she was looking for. You're still there, still watching, still haven't truly withdrawn, and in doing so, you restore the sense of certainty that your silence had begun to destabilize. Every effort to reclaim emotional sovereignty starts to fade with that seemingly small gesture. On the other hand, if you recognize the testing nature of these actions, you can choose to remain composed. This doesn't mean denying your emotions. It means refusing to participate in a behavioral pattern whose outcome has already harmed you. The one who observes calmly amid vague signals does not get led astray, nor allows fleeting emotions to dictate action. Accurately identifying the true nature of seemingly harmless behaviors is the first step in maintaining your ground, and only by holding that ground can you truly govern yourself. The essence of Stoic practice in the face of emotional turbulence. In the process of healing, silence and withdrawal from emotional reactions is the first step toward regaining self-mastery. When a man chooses not to respond to ambiguous gestures, not to seek validation from the one who caused the pain, he gradually rebuilds his self-respect and inner stability. However, this is also the stage where one is most vulnerable to a common psychological trap, the unexpected reappearance of the woman through emotional testing, which can derail the healing processes if met with a premature response. Reacting the moment you receive a sign from her, whether a brief check-in, a social media interaction, or a subtle expression of concern, can quickly erase the impression you had built of calm and self-control. Days of silence, efforts to manage your emotions, hours of inner discipline can all be undone by one careless act. Replying too quickly, restarting the conversation, or revealing that you're still watching her. Reacting too soon not only places you back into a passive position, but also restores a sense of power to the other person. When you respond immediately, the woman sees that you are still waiting. The distance you created through silence is suddenly closed, and the initiative shifts back to her. The uncertainty she began to feel when you withdrew dissolves, replaced by the confidence that she still holds sway over your emotions. In imbalanced relationships, your habit of always reacting first is often one of the reasons your value diminishes in the other's eyes. Stoicism emphasizes that true worth is not rooted in external validation, but in the ability to live by principle, especially the principle of not letting fleeting emotions dictate long-term behavior. A hasty reaction, from a behavioral standpoint, is proof that you have not yet broken free from emotional dependence. Remaining silent after establishing inner stability does not mean being cold. It reflects strength. Not reacting does not mean you feel nothing, but that you act from reason, not reflex. In Stoic practice, each time you restrain an impulsive response, you strengthen your will, the foundation of inner freedom and lasting recovery. In emotionally charged situations, especially after being hurt by someone once close, maintaining your position is far from easy. Their silence, their mixed signals, or sudden behavior can stir inner turmoil, provoking a desire to act, to speak, to respond emotionally to relieve discomfort. But from a Stoic perspective, the ability to stay grounded in the midst of emotional turbulence is the clearest sign of inner maturity. To hold your ground means to continue the course you've already chosen, not to react, not to seek validation, not to get pulled into old cycles, no matter how strong your emotions surge. When a woman returns with vague gestures, holding a steady posture, shows you've moved beyond emotional control and now act from principle. Emotional maturity is not shown by grand declarations, but by your ability to remain silent at the right time, to stay firm in your choice, and not allow the external to dictate the internal. When someone no longer reacts instinctively to familiar triggers, a nostalgic message, a suggestive photo, or a sign of return, it shows they have created enough safe distance between themselves and their emotions. Holding your ground also means establishing and protecting clear personal boundaries. An emotionally mature person does not allow access through curiosity or experimentation alone. They don't react to ambiguity, nor are they swayed by uncertainty. This isn't about indifference. It's about preserving the inner stability earned through effort and time. In Stoic practice, stability does not come from avoiding emotion, but from steering it with reason. When you hold your ground, you show that you no longer seek validation from the one who hurt you. You are no longer bound to whether they return or care. And that posture, not desperate, not rushed, not unanchored, is the clearest sign of deep emotional maturity. 4. When she comes back, do not open up too quickly. When a woman reaches out after a period of distance or broken conduct, the first thing that often arises in a man's mind is a sense of relief, even joy. That is a natural reaction when one has once cared deeply, been hurt by abandonment, and struggled to restore inner balance. However, in many cases, her return does not stem from genuine remorse or a sincere desire to correct past mistakes. Instead, it may be a psychological reflex to cope with the loss of control. When you've maintained solid silence, no messages, no response to indirect signals, the woman may clearly feel the shift in energy. She no longer holds the upper hand, no longer controls the emotional rhythm of the relationship as she once did. This creates a sense of unease, especially if she had grown used to you always maintaining the connection. That unease can lead to probing gestures, attempts to reconnect, or a direct return. However, such actions do not necessarily reflect a profound internal transformation. A return driven by testing often comes with ambiguous signals, a sudden check-in, gestures of care just noticeable enough to catch your attention, but not clear enough to convey commitment. If you react too quickly, responding the moment she reaches out, you risk undoing all the boundaries and self-mastery you've worked hard to establish. Her return will not deepen her respect for you, but will restore the old pattern, where you pursue and she remains in control. From the Stoic perspective, what matters is not whether someone returns, but the motivation behind that return. If it is not accompanied by clarity, concrete action, and a sense of responsibility, then it likely arises from discomfort with loss, not a commitment to rebuild something meaningful. Recognizing this distinction helps a man resist opening his heart too soon and remain anchored in the self-discipline he fought to earn. Throughout the process of healing after a breakup or emotional wound, a man may have invested time and effort to rebuild emotional balance, redefine personal worth, and establish inner boundaries. Maintaining silence was not a passive act, but a deliberate choice, rooted in the desire to no longer let emotions be steered by someone else. Yet all that progress can be undone in a moment if he opens his heart too quickly when she returns. When the woman sends signals, whether through kind words, shared feelings, or a wish to reconnect, the feeling of being seen may surge unexpectedly. This can easily lead the man to react, starting a conversation, revisiting sweet memories, or even expressing a wish to resume the relationship. However, reacting too early in this moment may tell her that all the silence was merely temporary, even strategic, not the product of a true interchange. If you fall quickly back into your former role, the responder, the pursuer, she will realize you are still predictable, still influenced. That weakens the entire stance you had built through patience, reason, and self-control. In her eyes, you are no longer the man who had risen above emotional dependency, but merely one who paused before returning to the same path. The damage extends beyond her perception. It deeply impacts your own process of recovery. Each premature reaction chips away at the trust you've built in your own self-mastery. Feelings of regret and disappointment may arise if you realize that your silence was not sustained to the end, and most importantly, you will have lost the chance to discern whether her return came from genuine change or was merely a temporary response to your absence. Therefore, maintaining distance, even when the other person returns, is the only way to protect the self-mastery you've built and avoid undoing a healing process that was hard-won. When a woman returns after a period of silence or after ending a relationship, her actions may arise from many different sources: a sense of loss, longing, insecurity, or a desire to reconnect with something once familiar. However, in many cases, the true motivation behind her return is not immediately clear. That is why, if a man wishes to understand the real value of her return, the most important response is not immediate action, but steadfast commitment to the principles he had already established. Steadfastness means maintaining appropriate distance, not rushing to welcome her back simply because she reappeared. This allows you to observe actual behavior rather than being influenced by fleeting words or emotional displays. A person who genuinely regrets letting go of the relationship will not disappear just because they are not instantly received. On the contrary, they will demonstrate their intentions through time, through repeated actions, and through visible effort to rebuild lost trust. If you remain composed and uncued by the initial return, you set an unspoken condition. That change must be proven through sustained action, not through impulsive emotion. Someone with sincere intentions will not be disturbed by such caution, while one returning for temporary reasons will likely withdraw when results do not come quickly. Steadfastness in this situation is not merely self-protection. It is a tool for filtering emotion and behavior. It helps you distinguish between a return born of genuine affection and one made simply to ease the discomfort of lost control. Over time, those who truly seek to rebuild the relationship will reveal themselves through serious investment, not only in time, but in commitment. Thus, holding your ground is not about making things difficult for the other person. It is about allowing the truth to emerge, and only when the truth is revealed through action can you make the right decision, not from emotion, but from deep understanding and steady reason. 5. When she tries to make you jealous, stand like stone. Jealousy is one of the most intense and common emotional reactions in relationships. It can arise instantly, without reasoned thought, especially when someone you were once close to shows interest or intimacy with someone else. The feeling of being replaced, devalued, or losing something that once belonged to you easily awakens deep insecurity. It is an instinctive reflex rooted in the desire to possess and protect the ego. However, in the Stoic framework, jealousy itself is not something that must be completely eliminated. It is your attitude and actions after it arises that truly matter. A person may feel uneasy, hurt, or even angry upon seeing a former partner with someone new. That is natural, but when that emotion is immediately turned into impulsive behavior, interrogation, criticism, comparison, or displays of desperation, it ceases to be instinct and becomes a clear sign of emotional weakness. Outbursts of jealousy often masquerade as efforts to reclaim one's worth, but in reality, they signal helplessness. When someone tries to regain attention by showing they are hurt, they have already handed over control of their emotions to the other. This allows personal value to be defined by someone else's behavior, something a Stoic always seeks to avoid. In Stoicism, strength is not the absence of emotion, but the refusal to let emotion control action. Moreover, jealous reactions tend to produce the opposite effect. They show the other person that they still have power over you. And if the situation was staged intentionally, they now know their tactic worked. This weakens the stance you've built and places you back in a reactive position, responding exactly as they hoped you would. Therefore, while jealousy may be inevitable in certain moments, recognizing it and choosing not to react hastily is what separates one who is led by instinct from one who governs his own mind. When a woman posts intimate photos with another man, engages publicly on social media in attention-seeking ways, or shows that she is thriving without you, the first response from the person once close to her is often jealousy, pain, or insecurity. These behaviors may appear to signal that she has truly moved on. However, in many cases, such displays do not reflect the actual value of the new relationship or her emotional state. They are a tool to test whether you will still react. This is a form of power test. When you were once quick to respond to every signal, to pursue, to make efforts during difficult times, your later silence may generate uncertainty. That uncertainty leaves her unsure of the influence she still holds over you. In such a case, displays of closeness with someone new are not necessarily about replacing you with a real connection, but often just a way to see if you still care. If you react, showing jealousy, questioning her, or sending emotional messages, you immediately confirm that she still has influence over you. In doing so, you unknowingly return the power you had reclaimed through silence, steadfastness, and focus on yourself. In that moment, you not only lose your stance, but are pushed back into the old position, the one who is led by emotion and by the behavior of others. Moreover, deliberately provoking jealousy is also a form of boundary testing. If the other person is used to you always reacting emotionally, they may use this tactic as a psychological lever to pull you back. If you do not respond, the test loses its effect. The person will then have to show clarity or retreat, as they no longer have control over the situation. From a Stoic perspective, recognizing that behavior meant to provoke jealousy does not reflect true value is essential. It helps you maintain composure, avoid emotional traps, and preserve inner sovereignty in the face of external actions. When a woman deliberately displays intimacy with another, sends ambiguous signals, or posts content meant to trigger jealousy, the goal is not always to start a new relationship. In many cases, this is a strategic act aimed at testing whether you are still affected, whether, in other words, you are still within her emotional sphere of influence. Faced with such behavior, someone who is not trained in inner discipline is easily provoked. Jealousy, hurt, and anger can lead to public reaction, from negative comments to confrontational behavior. However, from the Stoic view, such reactions are signs of being controlled, a clear indication that the mind is still governed by external forces that ought to remain at a safe distance. Composure in these situations is neither indifference nor pretense. It is the state of one who is aware of the emotions arising within, yet does not act upon them. When a man remains calm and does not react to provocation, he establishes an invisible yet unmistakable boundary. His emotions are no longer governed by the manipulations of others. Silence and non-response in such a moment are not just reasonable reactions. They are an unspoken declaration of emotional maturity. The other person may continue their attention-seeking behavior, but without response, they will be forced to reassess the effectiveness of their strategy. In many cases, it is precisely this calm that causes them to feel the loss of power and centrality in your mind. From the Stoic standpoint, composure is proof that you have escaped the emotional cycle, that you are no longer ruled by external signals, but act from inner principle. This is the clearest expression of inner strength, when you can stand firm in the face of provocation and still retain balance, dignity, and self-mastery. After everything shared, there is one truth I've come to see clearly. It's not what she does that causes our pain, but how we react to it. I've been there, confused, lost, even desperate, when her silence turned into a subtle form of punishment. But I eventually learned that silence can become a weapon if we use it to reconnect with ourselves, rather than to fight someone else. In real life, whenever you feel the urge to respond to a message, to clarify things, or to react just to prove something, pause for a few seconds. Ask yourself, will this make me stronger? Or is it pulling me back into servitude to emotion? That is the beginning of Stoicism, the inner questioning before the outer action. I'm not saying silence is always right, or that not reacting is inherently noble. But if you are in a period of recovery, rebuilding your self-worth after pain, then holding your ground, resisting emotional impulses, is how you protect what you have fought hard to reclaim. Practicing Stoicism does not require you to become emotionless, but to become someone who knows when to speak and when to stay silent in order to preserve himself. If this content resonates with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Because in the end, the strongest man is not the one who never gets hurt, but the one who does not let pain dictate the course of his life. I'll see you in the next video.